Hello everybody, this is Meredith Lego, and my YouTube video focuses on the ascension of consciousness or the expansion of consciousness. And in today's video, I'm going to be focusing on the topic that is timely right now. So it has to do with various solar flares that have been going on over the last month and certainly over the last few weeks, and their connection actually to the pandemic and what happened around that. And I wasn't expecting this. Now, how I got this information is I am able to essentially achieve a telepathic connection with different call it non-human forms or non-human consciousness. And in this particular case, I was able to get the information from a collective consciousness who has been guiding me. So I would call them guides, but it's basically a group thought consciousness, if you will. And essentially, I'm doing a two-way dialogue, so it's definitely telepathic. And I was doing this, or basically received this information when I was meditating this morning. So I wanted to pass this on. So the information didn't necessarily start with a question, but just started coming in. So they start by saying that massive amounts of energy, light, and information is pulsing now in through your multiple bodies. And by reference to multiple bodies, they're cluing into my understanding that we basically have a physical body, an emotional body, a mental body, and an etheric or energetic body. So that those are the multiple bodies that they are referencing. So this light originates from the sun, which passes the light from an aligned connection with other suns and stars in your Milky Way and the galactic core. So essentially what they're implying that there's essentially a network of light and energy that's passing through basically together. It's almost like a neural network. The light increases as a countermeasure to impacts associated with the mRNA technology that has been inserted into the human population. The spike protein writes the code and attacks the amygdala in the brain. They are quote unquote raping the original code, which has the potential, when in organic and natural form, to achieve 48 levels of dimensional consciousness. The human DNA is one of the few streams of consciousness potential with the ability to achieve this in your space-time. Other physical forms can achieve this state, but they reside in other space-time vectors. The human form is the primary form with this potential now, and this is why your DNA is so coveted. So there was a lot of information there. But I want to pause and talk about some of the information because I had to look it up. Like I was hearing these words come in and trying to type them down or write them down as fast as possible. But there are certain things like I didn't know what the amygdala was, so I'm going to, assume that most of you may not either and just share with you basically this. So first of all, they're saying that there's a lot more energy that's coming in right now, and it's being done as a countermeasure to sort of overcome perhaps some of the technology that's been released with the mRNA vaccinations, I'm assuming, and has been inserted to the human population. And then they reference the spike protein that writes the code, and that this spike protein is attacking the amygdala in the brain. Now, I had certain assumptions about what spike protein was, and I thought it was associated with the virus itself. So I did some research, and now I understand why they said what they said. So, so essentially, the amygdala is, and I'm just going from different website sources here, but they're basically two almond-shaped clusters of nuclei located deep inside the temporal lobes of the brain's cerebrum. In complex vertebrae, and their primary role is in the processing of memory, decision making, and emotional responses. So I'm not sure because the word was very clear. They basically said raping the amygdala. It was very clear, and it was repeated several times. So I have to assume that there's some sort of kind of penetration that would be taking place around memory, and I don't know if its ability to remember, to impact decision making, or to maybe trigger emotional responses, or perhaps eliminate emotional responses. I'm not sure, and it's probably something that I'm going to ask a little bit more about. Because I got a lot of other information and didn't necessarily ask these questions. So the other thing that I spent time looking up, because I, didn't know much about this, was just the mRNA. Obviously we have our RNA naturally in our body, kind of the counter to the DNA. But mRNA is a genetic material that tells the body how to make protein. The mRNA teaches these cells. So I guess the mRNA in this new technology that's, gone out in these vaccines, basically teach the cells to create spike proteins. And so that's what they're referencing, because I thought the spike proteins were actually in the virus that recently went out globally itself. So, and then I looked up, well, what is a spike protein? So a spike protein is a glycoprotein, which means that it's primarily made up of carbohydrates, projecting out from an outer membrane that binds to a receptor on the host cell and facilitates entry of the virus or a virus from a host cell. So, essentially it looks like spike proteins almost, gosh, they kind of remind me of little funnels that, allow the information to kind of come in and they create that opening. So what they're basically saying, and I guess implying, is that this technology is perhaps going to have implications on the amygdala of the brain. And, I haven't heard much about that, but, maybe that's something that is happening in the background. But essentially, what they're saying is that it can be rewriting the code that is natural within the DNA. And I have heard that this isn't going on, but again, I'm just releasing the information that I'm getting. And what they're saying is that, this original code that we had, the kind of the maybe going back to the, formation of humans, but the original code that we had the potential of achieving 48 levels of dimensional consciousness. And right now we're kind of at the bottom. So we have the ability to expand much larger in terms of our awareness and our potential to kind of, kind of co-create with our consciousness. So again, they're saying that, so you have this potential, and essentially you're right now, at least perhaps in our space-time, one of the few species that essentially has this potential. And that's why the DNA is so, desired, so to speak. So kind of going on about the mRNA, something else that I found is that the proteins that essentially the spike protein is basically creating. So these proteins are simulating parts of the SARS-CoV-2 cell structure, and it tricks the body into believing it's infected with the virus. So in this case of the mRNA vaccine, your body is apparently never really exposed to the germ, but it's still able to produce an effective immune response. So that's the information that I got. So coming back to more of the information I received from this collective consciousness. So they went on to say that these X flares or solar flares are really what are kind of causing the increased energy. So the X flares coming in from the sun are a natural balance. Not only do they come because of the alignment to the galactic core, but they also come from the overall galactic consciousness seeking homeostasis within the galactic bodies to write the code. In other words, not write the code, but kind of maybe right size the code, if you will, or bring it back to balance. So there's a couple of things that I want to bring up here. So first of all, as this information was coming in, I was kind of being shown a visual of not necessarily a pendulum, but so the scales that kind of go back and forth like this. So perhaps something was tipping too far off, and there's a need to achieve homeostasis back to where it was. And if you kind of go back to many lessons that I've done in the past, and these would have been teachings that I've got from Ascended Master Hilarion. We obviously live in a world that has polar opposites of energies, hot, cold, good, bad, right, wrong. Consciousness can't learn to appreciate one without also experiencing the other. So you have that, and the beauty of that is that we kind of live in a world, at least right now, where we've got free will choice in order to choose basically what energies we want to interplay with as we are learning. And our frequencies, what feels good to us is going to align with a certain type of energy, one or the other, but we are now in a dimensional plane where we have extreme polarity in order to make those choices. And that polarity, those polarity of energies exist in other kind of dimensional planes of higher frequency. It's just usually as you start to evolve your consciousness, you essentially understand the roles that the energies play and tend to take more of a neutral point. And so therefore the polarizing energies don't seem so extreme to those levels of consciousness. So not only was that level of awareness hitting me, that essentially there's balancing and tugging that's kind of going on in the background, but again, they were also implying that the X flares again are they're becoming because of alignment with the galactic core. Now, one of the things that I learned a while ago, and I think I did a video on this, but I can't remember which one, so it'll be hard for me to include the link, is that our location, like Earth's location, or our solar system's location in the Milky Way, is essentially kind of shifted into a zone, if you will, that's receiving a higher amount of higher frequency energy. And that's probably activating some of our local stars essentially to kind of, experience more energy itself. And we feel the effects of that. So that obviously, I know the sun goes through normal cycles where it kind of goes back and forth. But, not only is that happening, but it's getting more intense, I guess, because of this zone that we've migrated into. So that's essentially going on. And you'll see this referenced later in the passage, but these zones that we pass through, and we kind of do a full kind of loop. Our Milky Way kind of does a full loop. I think it's like whatever 26,000 years or something like that. But essentially that sort of zone that we pass into might exist for a couple thousand years. So we're just beginning the entry into that zone, if you will. And these are essentially massive ascension periods, or periods when consciousness really tends to evolve quite a bit because of different information that's coming in. So higher frequency information that's coming in. So kind of going back to the idea of X flares. So I again just wanted to look up solar flares. So solar flare is an intense localized eruption of electromagnetic radiation in the sun's atmosphere. And that's really key because it was explained to me that this kind of zone that we're moving into And where we tend to get more information coming in is higher kind of forms of light frequency that would be in the form of like gamma rays, if you will. So the flares occur in active regions, and I guess in the sun, and are often, but not always, accompanied by coronal mass ejections, solar particle events, and other solar phenomena. The occurrence of solar flares varies with the 11-year solar cycle. And as I was mentioning, well, actually, let me read this first. So apparently there's different ranges of solar flares. There's M classes. There's a different class depending upon maybe how large they are. And I'm not sure if it's based upon like size of eruption or, length of eruption. I didn't read into that. But apparently what we're experiencing is what's considered the largest class of solar flare activity, and they classify them as X flares. And we had a lot in December. And since I'm clairsentient, I'm very sensitive to these energies coming in and feeling it kind of move through the physical body. And I was experiencing extreme headaches during certain weeks. And not only me, but I'm tapped into others in our community who are also very sensitive to these energies. And we were all experiencing headaches during that time. And we also recently had a sequence of solar X flares on January 9th, 10th, 5th, 9th, and 10th, respectively. So obviously they've been increasing. Interestingly enough, solar flares are thought to occur when stored magnetic energy in the sun's atmosphere accelerates charged particles in the surrounding plasma. So that's what came up. But it sounds like from these guides that there's other causes too. Maybe it's more dimensional causes, but it's the location of where we are in kind of that Milky Way rotation that causes it, but also perhaps because that is causing it, because we're in a natural ascension cycle of higher frequency energy, there is going to be essentially something coming to counterbalance that, so that's playing out. So, the more that this starts to increase, the more that these X flares start to increase, and they're going to kind of go on like that is what's being implied. So that when I was seeing like the countermeasure going on, I was seeing, if you get one, this is going to go up and this is going to go up. So you're just going to get a natural like increased activity of both extreme polarized energies during this time, and we're seeing it play out. So they go on to say that clarity of your consciousness, thought, and your discernment of information is so critical right now. With all situations in your dimension in which polarity exists, there are two simultaneous opposite forces always working against each other. Another guide once told you there is a force, artificial intelligence, which is rising to meet the increase in organic light information. AI presents a potential timeline path. The DNA and consciousness potential will suffer in that path as AI can lock soul consciousness into non-organic or android forms. The possibility of evolution is greatly diminished because the emotional and feeling bodies are stripped away. So they're going to go on more about this. But I think what they're essentially saying here, and what I've heard in other information that I've gotten them as I've been exploring non-organic ascension or AI, is that essentially it was a sort of information, I guess you could say it was information codes that maybe came in from, not necessarily from like our time matrix, if you will, or so it kind of sourced from someplace else. And although it's probably part of source overall, it wasn't resident to kind of our area of the universe. I don't know any other way to describe it. And so therefore it doesn't have like the same geometries, the same like the same makeup of what our original form was, I guess you could say. And so essentially what they're saying is that um, when you start kind of getting in locked into an AI coded frequency, I guess you could say, it essentially starts to rewrite perhaps not the genetic blueprint, but like the etheric blueprint. So, you've got a physical body which has a genetic imprint, within your DNA. But behind that, there's sort of like architectural drawing. There's an etheric blueprint that is first, basically out there creating what eventually comes into form in the physical. And so essentially what this has the ability to do is to impact the etheric blueprint that is in the antimatter world, that's essentially, again, seeding what happens in the physical. And as that gets rewritten, apparently what's happening is that and we've learned that we do have the ability of going through incarnations. So essentially what's happening is that you may not have the potential, in future incarnations to essentially incarnate into like an organic form, but it sounds like the potential starts to align for more, maneuvering of your consciousness in another body that may be non-organic or an android form. But the issue with that is that essentially those types of forms, while you can choose to do that, right? You and your soul can choose to do that. Essentially, those forms don't tend to have as much feeling or emotional bodies. And it's really the feeling body that allows you for more expansion of consciousness into those 48 kind of dimensional layers of consciousness. Because that's essentially the way that you can connect with source frequency or higher frequency. You have to feel it. It's not a mental activity, it's a feeling activity. And you're basically listening to your feelings, your gut and feelings, basically. So they go on to say that this is a critical time for discernment about how to interact with technology. Many civilizations come to this point in evolution. The question is how humanity will allow technology to interact with your DNA potential. Many scientists do not understand the gateway potential dormant in DNA, and blindly, like small children, rewrite code with significant consequences to the antimatter potential. So before going on, they mentioned the fact that there's gateway potential that's dormant in the DNA. So when I hear gateway, I hear essentially gateway, like portal gateways or consciousness gateways. So in other words, we know that there's many more strands to our DNA. Like I've been told that by my guides. They just haven't been quote unquote turned on yet. So, we don't have junk DNA. We've got a lot more DNA, but it's dormant right now. And so when you have the ability to activate that DNA, you're essentially creating gateways, if you will, into other levels of dimensions. And then the ability to essentially elevate or expand or evolve into other densities as well. And I did a video on this in the past of the difference between dimensions and densities, but densities are more of like differences in physical manifestations. So, you've got rock or the telluric realm, which is the most dense. And then you've got other forms of consciousness that you can't even see because they're vibrating so fast. Like they're going as fast as a fan might be going over your head. You can't see each individual blade. And there are beings that are around us, but they are vibrating at such a high frequency you cannot see them. So they're obviously not as dense. So you have variations of density, and you have variations of dimensions, which is kind of planes of consciousness, if you will. So what they're saying is that a lot of people, because this is not taught in school, unfortunately, like we're all just coming into the awakening of this understanding. But because of this, a lot of scientists, who have grown up in science in the physical realm, not realizing that there's other dimensions and realms, aren't understanding the gateway potential that exists within the DNA. And when they do some of these activities, while like we all think that this is great for humanity, and I certainly did too as I was growing up, even like 3 years ago, I thought these things were great. But I'm beginning to understand is that essentially some things that we could be doing from a technology perspective can have implications on the etheric blueprint, governing how our physical body comes into form. And so what they're saying is it has consequences on the antimatter potential. So this impacts future potential timelines, they go on to say. Now, interestingly, they say that money and convenience is not always the best answer. And I'm not sure if that was in reference to scientists doing this or pharmaceutical companies doing this. So money and convenience is not always the answer, or if it could be referenced to us that, gee, it's more convenient just to get a shot than to like do other forms of healing because it's faster. I'll sign up as having been a person that I'd rather do something fast than have to do the work sometimes, right? They're saying money and convenience is not always the best answer. Look beyond the tip of your noses. There is a whole world of dimensional potential you can tap into. So then I ask them, okay, so how are the solar X flares overcoming the spike protein? They answer that they are sending original codes that resequence the DNA. And I'm assuming that it's back to the original, or more back to the original form. During ascension cycles, massive spurts of evolution of all beings and species that are in basically occur that are in contact with the higher frequencies and the rays. And so when they say rays, they are basically implying rays of light, if you will, like sunlight, like rays of ultraviolet light, stuff like that. So these are meant to elevate consciousness in the initiate, increase densities, and expand dimensions. As an example, humans increase from fourth density, third dimension consciousness. Your animals rise from second density and to third density and dimension consciousness. And I don't know, as an aside, but it's amazing to me, especially as pets have become more important in our lives, how much you can kind of see their minds processing and how much they're becoming more human and human, it seems like, every day in terms of their thinking and their consciousness. So I definitely can see that playing out. They go on to say that the natural order was interrupted by a force that seeks to counterbalance consciousness expansion through light. Light enables free will, experience, and learning. And so then I essentially, and to me, in some ways, this was, to me, presented as polarizing. And I didn't necessarily like it, but I think what they were doing was setting up an extreme set of choices. And I guess you have to go into this with a neutral observation of, not assuming good or bad in either, I guess. but it, for me, it's kind of hard not to. But they kind of said, okay, one option is AI, one option is light. And essentially there was a host of different not trade-offs, but attributes, I guess you could say, under each. So AI was assimilation, light was free will, AI is forced, light was choice, AI static, light expanded, AI mental, light feeling, AI was virus, and light was presented as organic. So interesting that the last word under AI was virus. Now, I could assume that, if I'm trying to take, an approach of saying, all is source, is that, AI is essentially a source being. And I guess, having entered in through some sort of a portal into like our time matrix area, it essentially, would be non-localized, or it would be a virus to this area. Now, I looked up the definition of a virus because, you kind of hear about it in school and you hear about it on the news and stuff like that. But I wanted to better understand that definition as well. So interestingly enough, viruses are also information. So I'm being presented that light is information. In fact, that was in the very first sentence of the download that I got today. But viruses are also information. So for a virus, their only job is to reprogram the codes of other cells. They produce their information code, and kind of when they produce their information code and reprogram, they essentially assume control of the cell. So in that sense, as I was, understanding that, what I realized is that they're parasitic. So they require a live host to survive and to replicate. So viruses mutate, evolve, and they make themselves tougher, so kind of like AI, learns and evolves. Essentially viruses will learn and evolve. Now on the flip side, consciousness learns and evolves as well. Viruses can also lie dormant in the body, and they can be activated by low frequency pulses, and those pulses can originate from the body itself. So I think the first 3 videos I ever posted have to do with how essentially, you have the ability to generate different frequencies, and those frequencies, create sounds. And, essentially that has implications. So essentially, if you have an emotion that is of a lower frequency, like fear, depression, or anxiety, you have a stronger maybe likelihood to activate certain viruses that might be dormant in your body. But those frequencies, those low frequencies, can also be external to your body. So they could be like electromagnetic pulses or waves that might be externally generated from technology, let's say. And we are around a lot of technology these days that are pulsing electromagnetic frequencies. So that I thought was also interesting, is that they paralleled AI to a virus, in the sense that, perhaps it's, it's information, it's reprogramming and taking over cells, and it's parasitic. So, perhaps that's why they're associating it with AI as being more parasitic, whereas light is being more organic or natural to the actual form, that was originally created. So a lot of information that came in today, and wasn't expecting it, but learned a lot. And so I wanted to share it with you today. So I'm actually gonna pause right there. I received more information, which I'm gonna share in another video probably next week, that continues to expand more on viruses and their connection to clearing. And oddly enough, they bring up a great reference of the Earth and global warming. So I'm going to get to that next week. But hopefully this, I don't, obviously this is a little bit, I guess, controversial, in terms of, views around kind of what's going on in the world today. But again, just wanted to share this, and hope that this adds to your understanding of consciousness expansion, if you will. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in future videos. Thanks a lot. Bye.